It's August 3rd, 2025, and a rare storm is about to hit while the tropics are beginning to heat up also. But first, we're going to take a look at our rare storm and our severe weather outlook today, and we can see that we have a marginal risk of severe weather out here in the Pacific Northwest, which is definitely something that you don't see very often. Then we're seeing a continuation of our weather pattern of a very active period out here in the upper plains and Great Plains, and then also some strong but not really severe storms being possible out here in the southeast. Now, today's risk is going to be fueled by the threat of some damaging 60-mile-an-hour winds, and the risk of this overspreads both of our marginal risk areas, but currently there is a very conditional chance of some storms out here in the Great Plains, mostly the South Plains, where I do think there could potentially be an upgrade to seeing some 70-mile-an-hour winds, depending on how the storms evolve today. And our hail risk also spans both of our entire marginal risk areas for the conditional threat of some hail possibly being in excess of 1 inch in diameter. But I do think there's going to be a similar situation, the risk of damaging winds, where I do think we could see an upgrade down here, specifically in the Southern Plains, for potentially some hail even around 2 inches in diameter. And then we do actually have a very conditional threat for a couple of weak spin-up tornadoes down here in northwestern Texas. And currently this is extremely conditional, and there is a pretty 50-50 likelihood of this actually panning out. Then for a tropical outlook, we have sort of a 0 to 100 situation going on out here, where yesterday we had no areas of potential development. Now we have two, one right off the coast of North Carolina, then another one in our main development region. Now our one right off the coast of North Carolina should not really pose any risk to the US, and also has a very small chance of actually developing out, only a 30% chance. However, our one in our main development region could actually pose a risk to the United States in the very far future, but currently it's just something to look out for and keep an eye on. And today is actually supposed to be the coolest day that we've seen in weeks across much of the US, with pretty much the entire US except for Texas and the Gulf Coast experiencing anywhere between mid 70s to mid 80s feels like temperatures, with unfortunately Texas and the Gulf Coast still experiencing high to low 100s feels like temperatures today. And then our highest risk of flash flooding would be down here in northern Texas, and also back down here in the southeast, specifically the northern portion of Florida and southeastern Alabama and southern Georgia. And in these areas we could see anywhere between 2 to 4 inches of rainfall. Then we have a couple of marginal risk of flash flooding, one that spans pretty much the entire Great Plains, and another one which also spans a big chunk of the southeast. And in these areas there's just that conditional threat for 1 to 2 inches of rainfall. And then here's what the radar could look like later today. We're going to see some storm initiation out here in the Great Plains around the mid to late afternoon hours, and it's going to be due to some troughing activity, a bit of a stationary front draped across parts of the upper plains, then a front and a low pressure system back up here in the central to northern plains. Now, these storms are mostly going to bring the threat of some damaging winds, but specifically down here south of the Colorado border is where we're going to see that greatest threat for some large damaging gusts, potentially even 65 to 70 miles an hour, and even potentially some hail anywhere between 1 to 2 inches in diameter. And then these storms would push southeastward to more southward into parts of Texas, and in northwestern Texas to the Texas Panhandle is where I do think there could be potentially the threat for all hazards of severe weather, with an outflow boundary laid behind from a storm from yesterday, with a couple of discrete storms due to that very weak forcing out here. And also that weak forcing is the reason why we could actually not see really any storms out here today. But we're going to err on the side of caution and act that there are going to be storms out here today, because there is still a decently large chance that there will be storms. But if there are storms out here in this environment and does play out like it's depicted here in this model, there is definitely the threat 2 inch in diameter hail, 70-mile-an-hour wind gust, and possibly even a couple of spin-up tornadoes. And then moving out here into the Pacific Northwest in our rare risk area that we don't see very often, we're going to see that around the early to mid-afternoon hours, we're going to see a big cluster of storms here in parts of eastern Oregon. And the main threat with this would be some small hail and damaging wind gusts, possibly being around 60 miles an hour. And it looks like the threat with this would mostly be over by the late afternoon. Then this would be initiated by mostly some troughing in the region. And speaking of troughing, here are 500 millibar winds. These help to show where we could see some organizing shear and also some forcing for a storm. So immediately we're going to notice a short wave and just general flow pushing through the Pacific Northwest, which is going to help to initiate those storms as well. We're also going to see a high pressure system and quite a bit of ridging out here in the desert Southwest, which is actually going to help to pinch a lot of our flow, further enhancing it. We're also going to see a short wave pushing through parts of the upper plains, which is why I do think that greatest risk of severe weather is going to be pretty much anywhere south of the Colorado border today. Now, a couple things I'm noticing is that there's actually going to be a lot of flow over top our main risk area, which could actually hinder the lift for our storms, and is one of the reasons why that threat is pretty conditional currently. But this short wave does actually look like it could have enough juice to potentially initiate some storms. So I'm definitely more on the side of that we're going to see storms than we're not today. And here is a look at our environment in the Texas Panhandle to northwestern Texas. And immediately we're going to see a photograph that would be conducive for all hazards of severe weather with a bit of curvature, then a nice elongation. We're also going to see some nice surface helicity and also some nice low level shear. Now this could be anywhere between 100 to 200 surface helicity and 10 to 20 knots of low level shear, which definitely would be conducive for potentially a couple of tornadoes. So we're also going to have definitely a low enough cloud base for that to be a possibility. Then we're also going to see quite a bit of organizing shear at around 50 knots, which is definitely going to be for strong updrafts and organized storms. And that's going to be coupled with some wind veering, further amplifying that risk of some organized storms. And also, these storms appear to be discrete on a lot of our weather models. So there's definitely the chance of a couple of spin up tornadoes, possibly even a couple being not really that weak. But the main thing, which is making that threat very conditional, is that we're going to have quite a bit of dry air aloft. Then we're also going to have some pretty warm temps at around 800 to 700 millibars, which could cap our air mass pretty substantially. And with the weak forcing present, that is why that threat for some severe storms is actually quite conditional. I would give it about a 50-50 to 75-25 chance of seeing some strong storms out here today, but nonetheless, our environment is going to be very conducive for some large hail and damaging winds. If we do get those storms on top of a couple of spin up tornadoes, our mid-level lapse rates are going to be super high at 9.5 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. And we have tons of cape up here near our freezing level, and that's going to be coupled with our strong updrafts. So definitely the reason why I do think we could see some large hail, possibly even being in excess of 2 inches if we do get those storms. And we also see a very moist environment coupled with a very unstable environment, 70 dew point, 5,000 cape. And then we also see a very high downdraft cape around 1,700. So another reason why I think we could see some storms possibly producing some 70-mile-an-hour damaging gusts out here. And then our relative humidity is also not going to be super high as well, which is another reason why I do think we could see some damaging gusts. With that evaporative cooling, then our 3 cape is going to be over 100, which is going to fuel that threat for all hazards of severe weather as well. And then the rest of the upper plains is going to have a pretty similar environment minus the tornado characteristics, because these storms are going to be quite a bit more high based and there's not really going to be nearly as much shear or helicity. However, we're still going to have a moist environment, a fairly unstable environment, quite a bit of downdraft cape. So all reasons why we could see some severe storms bringing some damaging winds. Then we also have some decent mid-level lapse rates with some cape up here in our freezing level. Then we also see that classic inverted V profile. So an environment that would be very conducive for severe weather, and pretty much the rest of our plains risk area minus the chance of tornadoes, but definitely the threat of some large hail and damaging gusts would still be in play for pretty much everywhere else in our plains risk area. And the last area we're going to look at is our rare storm out here in the Pacific Northwest. We're going to see that we're definitely going to have enough moisture for the region, and then we're also going to have over 1,000 cape and actually a pretty high downdraft cape at around 1,300, and also a low relative humidity. So all reasons why we could potentially see some damaging gusts and severe storms. And all these storms would likely be pretty high based, which could also amplify that threat for some damaging gusts. Then we also have some pretty high mid-level lapse rates at 8.7 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer, which is a reason why we could potentially see some small hail with these storms. And our bulk shear in the sounding says 20 knots. I likely think it could be anywhere between 20 to 35 knots. So another reason why I do think we could see some organized clusters, bringing that threat of some small hail and damaging gusts out here in the Pacific Northwest.